I'm Catherine Locke, author of The Girl with the Red Balloon. I'll be joining you soon on the Book of Life podcast. I'd like to dedicate my episode to Meg Murray, wherever you are.
Oh, great.
I would not have written the book without A Wrinkle in Time, so...
Well, that's an interesting comment. Tell me more about that.
Oh, I love A Wrinkle in Time, and I loved A Wind in a Door and Swiftly Tilting Planets. We don't speak of many waters. But A Wrinkle in Time was the first time that I read a fantasy book and understood what it was trying to say about my world. That's when I made the connection. Then I was like, oh, that's why people read science fiction and fantasy. Before that, I had just read historicals and contemporaries and not understood why people wanted to read made-up stuff. But connecting, like, this is saying something about our world was really special to me. And it's why I wrote a book that is heavily historical, but has that science fiction and fantasy element to pull readers in to be able to reflect our world back to them.
This is the Book of Life. I'm Heidi Rabinowitz. The Girl with the Red Balloon is a magical time travel, historical fiction, sort of Holocaust book that won a Sidney Taylor Honor in the Teen Readers category for 2018. I met the author, Catherine Locke, at the Association of Jewish Libraries conference in Boston, where we snuck into a side room to talk. Please excuse the faint hubbub coming from outside. We discussed not only Catherine's book, but also her article on Medium.com, Thinking About Jewish Children's Literature in a Time of Anti-Semitism. I'd love to hear your response to the topic, so after you listen to Catherine, please call in or leave a comment at bookoflifepodcast.com. So, Catherine Locke, you are the author of The Girl with the Red Balloon, a 2018 Sidney Taylor Honor book in the teen category. Mazel tov.
Thank you so much.
So I want to talk about your book, but first I want to talk about something else that sort of gives context for the book. A few months ago, you published an article in Medium called Thinking About Jewish Children's Literature in a Time of Anti-Semitism. So let's start with a brief overview of that article and what inspired you to share those thoughts.
So I wrote this article actually as a speech for my home synagogue, Beth Emeth, and it is basically about how I think that Jewish children's literature needs to be broader. It needs to include more topics than just offering Holocaust stories, particularly to middle grade and young adult readers. I think if you look at the types of books that we're publishing right now with Jewish characters, by Jewish writers or not by Jewish writers, they tend to center around the Holocaust. And I worry that what that is doing to Jewish children's identity is centering it on something where we are always the victims and not offering a broader view of what it means to be Jewish in a post-Holocaust world, taking all of that into context.
In the article, you say, I'm quoting, "We're doing a profound disservice to children, both Jewish and not Jewish, when we produce poorly edited and poorly researched books about real-life events, and in the case of the Holocaust, a failure to properly impart the facts or to deliberately reinterpret them, lie, or omit, reinforces anti-Semitic structures and worldviews and actively supports anti-Semitism." So, do you see a lot of that happening in kid lit or adult lit?
A lot of it, no. Some of it, yes. So I wrote that about 2 books that I've read in the last 3 years, both of which I felt distorted history to benefit the author's worldview. And in both of those cases, I felt that the result of that warping was anti-Semitism. In one of the cases, the Jewish character falls in love with a Nazi guard, and he helps her escape, and she converts to Christianity. And the book frames it in a way where the conversion is the only way that she is able to escape. And then the second one was a young adult book where a character had gone to boarding school in Vienna in the mid-1930s, never mentions Kristallnacht. The character admires Nazis invading Poland, and various other things that I felt like undermined her Jewish identity and made her unbelievable. And I think that that is really damaging to Jewish children reading the book, but also to non-Jewish readers who may or may not have any Jewish friends or Jewish community around them, and their only way of interacting with Jewish people is through fiction. And when it's wrong, that has ramifications for how they view us in real life.
Holocaust literature is a booming business.
It is.
And it will probably continue to be so for a variety of reasons that we've discussed many times on this podcast. So rather than complain about this fact, how can we make this productive in some way? What kinds of Holocaust books do we need to write and publish and give awards to and promote?
I definitely don't want to publish fewer Holocaust books, especially as Holocaust survivors are dying. That is not a good idea. I do want to increase the number of Holocaust books written for young readers by Jewish authors versus non-Jewish authors. I think that you can feel the difference in the text when it's written by a Jewish author. I would like to see discussion of other victims of the Holocaust, what the Nazis did to disabled people, to Roma, to gay people. And I would like to see children's literature that takes place in the immediate aftermath. There isn't much where we see a young Jewish protagonist in 1948. I would love to see that. If it takes place in Israel, in the United States, in Europe, I think that that is also a really important story to tell, is the story of resilience, and being able to find ways to believe in the world again is as powerful as finding those moments in the darkest of times.
Mm-hmm. Good. And when we see books that don't uphold those standards, what can we do to rein in their negative impact? When we see poor examples of Holocaust literature, and they're already out there, is there something we can do about it?
I think we can talk to our librarians about getting them off the shelves. I think talking about why they're bad is actually really helpful. Every time that I call out a book on social media for being a Nazi romance or a poor example of Holocaust literature or ahistorical Holocaust literature, I always have non-Jewish people saying, I didn't know. And I think that's a really important part of doing this work, is calling it out publicly so that we can educate everyone about how to read Holocaust literature better, how to curate our collections in bookstores, in our homes, in our libraries better. So I think being public about it, and then not buying it. Publishing listens to money, and if we stop supporting bad books or we start demanding better scholarship that goes into fiction, then publishing will listen to that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the impact on Jewish kids and on non-Jewish kids of the dominance of the Holocaust as a subject in Kidlit?
I think for non-Jewish children, they see us as perpetually the victims. I think you see that playing out in media quite often. I think that a lot of the early literature that non-Jewish children take in about the Holocaust is fiction. And I worry that that allows them to categorize us as fiction as well. And a lot of those stories are told from non-Jewish points of view, where they are seeing the Jewish person as the other, on the other side of the fence, going on the boat, being somewhere else, hidden. And we aren't hidden. We're here. And I want to make sure that we have literature that shows non-Jewish children that we are here. And for Jewish children, I want them to know that the Holocaust, for Western Ashkenazi identities, is a formative time. There's no way to talk about ourselves without it. But we also are more than it. That's really important, to give them the same adventures and romance and struggles in fiction that everybody else gets, not just genocide.
Beyond Holocaust books, Jewish Kidlit is flourishing right now, but what gaps do you see that you think need to be filled?
I see a lot of gaps, particularly in young adult. We're finally seeing a couple of young adult contemporary books with Jewish characters by Jewish authors, where the character is Jewish and the focus may or may not be on their Judaism. You'll Miss Me When I'm Gone by Rachel Lynn Solomon is a great example of a book where it's about two sisters struggling with a terminal disease diagnosis, but it's how they negotiate their faith. One of them rejects it and one of them embraces it. And I thought that was a really excellent example. I'd love to see more like that. I would love to see more high fantasy that involves Jewish mysticism or pulls in Jewish concepts or is based in Israeli culture. I would love to see that, especially young adult literature.
So we're going to talk about your own writing in just a minute, but are there any Jewish children's books by others that you want to shine a light on?
Sure. I just mentioned You'll Miss Me When I'm Gone by Rachel Lynn Solomon. Playing with Matches by Suri Rosen is one of my favorites, an absolute delight. Scarlett Epstein Hates It Here. I cannot remember that author's last name. Her first name is Anna. But Scarlett Epstein Hates It Here was fantastic. And Laura Silverman's Girl Out of Water was also great.
So now, let's talk about The Girl with the Red Balloon. I know it's a hard book to describe, but can you give us the elevator pitch?
Sure. The Girl with the Red Balloon is about a girl from our time named Ellie Baum who accidentally time travels back to 1988 by way of a magical red balloon and finds herself caught in a conspiracy of history and magic in East Berlin. And how she gets there is related to how her grandfather escapes a death camp in 1942.
So what inspired this story?
Couple of things. I had been thinking about how angry my grandfather was when I went back to Ukraine in 2006, and I was the first family member to return there since my family left. And he said, "How could you go back to a place that treated us so terribly?" And he used it present tense. He was born in the United States, so I was really interested in how it had also happened to him, in how he described it. And then I was driving to work one day, and 99 Red Balloons came on the radio. And in my head, I saw a girl going over a wall with a red balloon. And I'm pretty good at following my imagination now. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Where is she going? And why is she going there? By the time I got to the office, I knew it was the Berlin Wall. I knew it was close to when the wall came down, but not 1989. I didn't want to set it too close. And it took me a while to find her grandfather's part of the story. I wrote a full draft and threw it out, and the second draft is where I found Benno's. Benno is Ellie's grandfather. I found his part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Would you consider it a Holocaust book?
I do, but I know people who don't. I consider it a Holocaust book because 10,000 words of it, 8% of the book, is set during the Holocaust, and I think that that is substantial enough, and that the book hinges so much on what happens to Benno, and I don't think it would work without Benno's point of view. So to me, it is a Holocaust book, which makes me a bit of a hypocrite when I was thinking about Jewish children's literature and expanding it, and I wrote a Holocaust book. But I also know people who adamantly to my face disagree and say, no, you didn't write a Holocaust book. Why would you call it a Holocaust book? So that is definitely a debatable topic, I guess.
Well, if you think of it as a Holocaust book, how does this book fit in with what we were talking about in terms of giving readers Holocaust literature that gives a healthy view of Jewish identity?
So 8% of The Girl with the Red Balloon takes place in 1941, 1942 in a ghetto. And it is not the most uplifting part of the book, for sure. But I really wanted a bulk of the book to be Ellie's point of view. And Ellie is a teenager from our time. This is a spoiler, but she does not go back to 1941, 1942. She's not the one that helps her grandfather escape. She never touches on the Holocaust. And I really wanted to give teenagers someone they could relate to. That's the reason that Ellie time travels. She's not just a 1988 East Berlin teenager. She comes from our time. She is their entrance into this magical world. She is a heroine in her own right, in a time that has nothing to do with the Holocaust. And the skill sets and what she is battling and the choices she's confronted with are not Holocaust choices. And that was really important to me, is to give Jewish teenagers now a heroine who time travels and does magic and does all sorts of really adventurous things and makes bad choices and makes good choices. But what she does doesn't touch the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm. So, hashtag we need diverse books.
Yes.
Of course, the whole diverse books movement. This book is pretty diverse all by itself. So can you talk about the different kinds of representation that we see in the characters and how you chose who to include?
Yes. So Ellie is Jewish. She's American. She's from Pittsburgh. Kai is Romani, English Romani. He's Romanikal. and he and his sister are hiding in East Berlin to protect his sister. His sister Sabina is very, very talented at magic, very powerful, and people have wanted to use her for nefarious purposes. And Mitzi is Kai's best friend, becomes Ellie's best friend, and she is gay, and she lives in East Berlin. Mitzi came to me right away, blue hair, full personality. She has never changed from the first time I wrote her. I knew immediately I wanted to include a queer character who kind of represented the strong counterculture that was happening in East Berlin at that time around skateboarding and music and underground clubs, and I wanted Mitzi to kind of represent all of that, which is a big burden, but she does it well. And Kai came to me because I really do think we need much more representation for Roma in Holocaust literature and in YA literature at all. I hope that more Romani authors are getting published, but I'm really proud of the representation that Kai and Sabina have. Yeah, I use sensitivity readers. I did a lot of research. I hope I did them well, but I'm very proud of that trio in the book.
Mm-hmm. How does The Girl with the Red Balloon help with Tikkun Olam? How does it help to heal the world?
That's such a good question. I hope that The Girl with the Red Balloon opens people's eyes to the complexities of what happened in Europe after the war. I hope that readers take in, especially Kai's story, and I hope by taking in both those complexities and Kai's and Sabina's story that they are less quick to judge. I think that especially, I don't want to put a time period on it, but especially recently, I feel like a lot of what is out there is black or white, good or bad. And a lot of the choices that I put into this book are not one or the other. They're not good or bad. The villain in the book is very sympathetic. There's a world in which I root for the villain, and there's a world in which I don't agree with what Ellie does in the book. And I really want to introduce those choices because I think that often we're not given black and white choices, and we do have to make choices and stand by them in a gray world, and that's hard. But I want to give readers more resilience to do that, more understanding that in a gray world there are no good choices and there are no bad choices. And I think by reintroducing that gray, it can start to mend a rift that I see right now.
Wow, that's a great answer.
Thank you.
What are you working on next?
I just finished copy edits and past pages for The Spy with the Red Balloon, which is the companion that comes out in October, which is about two Jewish American siblings who start the balloon magic world on the Manhattan Project in 1943. And I am working on a middle grade fantasy that is not sold yet, and I am drafting a young adult contemporary with two Jewish siblings as well.
Is there anything you'd like to talk about that I didn't think to ask you?
I should have probably mentioned my Jewish anthology that's coming out next year.
Oh, good.
So I am co-editing a Jewish anthology, so it is Jewish young adult stories, all written by Jewish authors, Orthodox, Reform, non-observant, conservative, all across the spectrum. It comes out from Knopf in fall of 2019. It is called It's a Whole Spiel, and it's such a diverse group of stories. Laura Silverman's co-editing it with me. Every time I think about it, I start to cry because it's just more than both of us thought it would be. We really wanted to put an anthology together that was contemporary and was diverse, and I don't think we realized all the emotions that were going to come out when we just read story after story of Jewish representation by Jewish authors. And I'm very, very proud of that anthology and excited to put it out in the world.
Wonderful. Well, Catherine Luck, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Jules. I'm the author of Light the Menorah, a Hanukkah handbook. And in an upcoming episode, I'll be talking about Light the Menorah. And I'd like to dedicate this podcast to young families everywhere because I hope that this book will make their Hanukkah celebrations more meaningful.
If you enjoy the Book of Life podcast, please become a patron at patreon.com/bookoflife. Leave a review on iTunes or a comment on our blog at bookoflifepodcast.com. You can also like our page at facebook.com/bookoflifepodcast. Follow us at twitter.com/bookoflifepod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band. Thanks for listening and happy reading.